My name is James Kendall, and I'm a fellow with Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. And I'm not going to go into my speakers' bios. You should all have the handouts, and you've got their detailed bios. If you're curious, you can look us up. So to save time. And I'd like to briefly introduce our panel. We've got Colonel Chris Koch. We've got from the United States Marine Corps, currently at National War College. We've got Colonel Makoto Kasamatsu, who's come all the way from Western Army in Kumamoto. Probably the longest journey to get here. And then finally, Dr. Karl Rohr, United States Marine Corps retired, who is now actually ceased to be a consultant and are now working full-time with the U.S. government. And I got involved with the situation in Tohoku by virtue of the fact that I was a student at the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo. And that was supposed to be a year of sort of rest from operational requirements, study, making contacts, making friends among my Japanese peers, for a year of a sort of heavy security and IR curriculum at NIDS there in Meguro. On the day of March 11th, it just so happened that we were, the foreign students and our sponsors were down in Nara on a field trip. And I'll never forget the day I was buying a souvenir for my family at the gift shop in a temple in Nara when the earthquake hit, and we felt it all the way down there. We obviously knew that something, initially, you're in Japan, just as if you live in California, you're used to these sort of things, and you kind of shrug it off. And then after about half an hour or so, our Japanese friends' cell phones started going off as texts started coming in, and people started looking at the news and seeing that this was not an ordinary earthquake. And as we went back to our hotel, it became rapidly apparent that something indeed very bad had happened. And we all wanted to get back to Tokyo as quickly as possible, but it was impossible because the train lines were down and we had to wait. So on my way, we finally made our way back by Shinkansen the next day, got to Tokyo. It was a very eerie, blacked out city when we arrived. And I got a text. It's the most succinct order I've ever received in my life. I got a text from the Marine Detachment at Camp Fuji, which I was administratively attached to. Go to Yokota. Okay, go to Yokota. So I got back to my apartment and threw a few things in a sea bag and grabbed such gear as I had, because remember, I was there as a student. I wasn't expecting any sort of operational requirement. And I did make my way to Yokota. And eventually, after a couple of days of trying, made my way to Sendai. And it was actually in Yokota and then in Sendai that I met the gentleman on the stage. And that leads us to our story. I personally was a foreign area officer by one of my trades in the Marine Corps. As a Japanese linguist, spent a lot of time working and studying in Japan, and found myself working in the Nichibei Chosei Center, the U.S. Japan Coordination Center at Joint Task Force Tohoku in General Kimizuka's headquarters in Sendai. So that's a thumbnail sketch of my story and what I was involved with for the next month, and it involved all these three gentlemen. So I'll turn it over to Colonel Chris Koch, who's going to give us a more in-depth version.
So good morning. First of all, truly honored to be here, not only to discuss the events and the aftermath, but also to remember those folks, and so close to the 5th year anniversary. My perspective is a little bit different. I'm at the other end of where General Field was. We're an operational unit, a little bit bigger, in Okinawa, Japan. And we had a few things going on that day. But before getting into what eventually became our mission, and that was up in Sendai, I would just like to remember General Kimazuka for a second, as he became one of my heroes from this evolution. The way, and I'll talk more specifically about his actions with the Northeast Army in Sendai, but how really at sort of what we call the tactical level made this happen on the ground. So just a remembrance to him. So it was Friday, and what were the Marines up to that day? We had just completed a biannual exercise with the Koreans, so we had communication equipment and headquarters and tents and all kinds of stuff spread all over Northeast Asia, literally. And our MEU aboard the Essex was off the coast of Philippines, soon to be, or actually engaged in exercise here. So we were fairly scattered. And so very quickly, even before the declarations of disasters and we have assets, we're starting to bring ourselves together, as all the forces did, to really lean into and pre-position ourselves so that when we could, we would. And in a lot of cases, we actually stepped into some gray area by going ahead and launching and starting to support efforts. So that Saturday early, and a lot of what I'm going to say kind of reverberates from previous speakers, and I'm sure into this afternoon. We at 3MEF, it was obvious this was an all-in proposition. Every resource that we had was going to be a part of this evolution. Just as much as the Reagan turned and headed right toward Japan, the Essex did the same thing. So things were underway to get to the area, to the disaster area, and start contributing. That Saturday, General Timberlake, but the brigade, which I was the chief of staff for, we went forward to Yokota, and that's personally met General Fields only for a couple of minutes. He barely remembers. But the point being is that he said, look, I need you guys to go up to Sendai and to link in at local level and start seeing what's going on, assess, and let's start driving where we can start pushing relief efforts there. So that's what we did. Sunday, we flew up, and obviously we couldn't fly directly into, and this is a lesson learned, and thank goodness for V-22s, but we got up there by a little bit of planes and trains, but got ourselves to Sendai, and were picked up by General Kimazuka's Hueys, and that's when we got the first aerial view of the airport, and really that's when it became extraordinarily real, the devastation, to see it firsthand. So we landed and went into the headquarters there at Sendai, sat down with General Kimazuka and his staff, and started the integrating piece. What amazed me was, this is Jiatai, this is a ground, an Army headquarters, but it was purple. We say purple, but I mean there was every shades of military in there, and you could see, the civ mil piece, but the civilian aspect of how this joint task force came together, but it was more than that. It was the headquarters element right there to effect relief, and so. Our piece was fairly simple, to become part of the BCAT at the local level, in which me and Colonel Hiroi initiated.
What is the BCAT?
Thank you. Bilateral Crisis Action Team. Although I think there may be some dispute as far as what those letters actually stand for, but that's what we were doing there. So we linked in and we started to quickly do an assessment, look at where we could help, and start flowing into relief and trying to bring together, in conjunction with Yokota, the relief efforts to help Yokota basically coordinate that effort. Obviously, they had attention on, this was the multi-aspect disaster, so we tried to do that at the local level. The last thing I'll say before passing it on was, as time grew, you know, with disaster reliefs, you quickly amass forces and resources, and then you try to turn things out. So you started to click the time that you have on ground before you need to return, and this drives into a complexity of mental thought that has been talked about earlier about not wanting to go, and because you become so connected with what's going on the ground, on the spot. And but our time did come where we needed to get back to Okinawa and the units needed to return. So just to touch on that. And lastly, there was mention of, and I just wanted to reiterate, and it was obvious that Japan, and certainly in Sendai, they didn't need our help. They're more than capable of resolving the issues. They certainly were appreciative, but what it drives to, and I just phrase it in a different way, it's what friends do. It was more of an act of friendship, providing help, but it's what friends do at a personal level. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Kasamatsu-san, who is the reason we asked Colonel Kasamatsu to come is because he was the coordinator at Sendai Airport. And you've heard a bit about Sendai Airport already, and Kasamatsu-san, although he would never say it, did heroic work and was a key individual in the process of getting Sendai Airport reopened. So now that I've embarrassed you, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, James. First of all, it is my great honor to be here to share my experience with all of the audience here. And also, this is a great opportunity for me to see again my old friends sitting here, Colonel Karl and Colonel Rohr, and now he is Dr. Rohr. They were at Camp Sendai leading the bilateral coordination cell. Well, actually, they made this first ever Japan-US bilateral operation very successful. In those days, I was at Sendai International Airport as a chief coordinator for reopening the airport. So today, I would like to introduce what has been done at International Airport and its meaning. As some of you know, that Sendai International Airport is a hub airport at Tohoku region. It's quite busy airport, about 3 million people use it in a year. But the location is a problem. It's located only 2 kilometers away from the coastline. So on March 11, the great earthquake and massive tsunami damaged and paralyzed all functions of the airport, including air traffic control tower, all radar assets, and it left any kinds of debris, broken cars, mud, animal bodies, and even the human bodies. Over 1,600 passengers and airport workers at that time were forced to stay in the building over that night. Everybody, including me, who saw those situations, thought it takes more than a half year to reopen the airport. But in fact, the airport was reopened a month later, and the commercial aircraft started its operation on 13th April. So what made this miracle? The first things I would like to stress is that the clear objectives were fully shared by all actors from the beginning. In those days, there were a variety of organizations at the airport, including Airport Authority, representatives from the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport, Miyagi Prefectural Government Office, private companies contracted with the airport, US Marines, US Army, US Air Forces, and me myself. So based on my experience overseas, the most important but most difficult thing at the beginning is to find and set common goals among different actors. Usually, each actors have each own agendas, and during the critical time, it makes the things more complicated. We all agreed and set the objectives for all concerted the activities. An urgent objective, it is also the operational objective. It was to make Sendai Airport available to be used as an airlift operations hub for relief supplies for the region. Secondary objective, and it is also the psychological objective, it was to reopen the airport for commercial airlines as early as possible as a symbol of recovery of Tohoku areas. Second thing I would like to stress is the behaviors of all US forces working outside. When they first meet with local people, they bowed. They bowed to the local people instead of shaking hands. They restricted themselves deploying very small areas with the reason of it may steal the area useful for the local people. The reason why I introduced this is I've never seen such militaries overseas in these kind of HADL operations. They paid much respect to the local people. Tohoku region is a little bit different from the Tokyo. It's more conservative in general. Cultural awareness and behavior based on that is very important, especially working in culturally, traditionally, or religiously different environment. And the US forces beautifully show the model. Stationing and living in Japan together with Japanese local people probably enabled them to take such an action. Finally, I would like to mention the significance of reopening Sendai International Airport operation. I was very often asked, did US forces come to open the airport because Japan Ground Self-Defense Force does not have such capabilities? The answer to this question is no. But if US forces did not take this job, Japan Ground Self-Defense Force would be forced to pull out another 260 soldiers from ongoing search and rescue operations. So US forces activities at the airport enabled us, Japanese forces, to be close to Japanese citizens to save and rescue. So I think it is also a model of strategic role sharing during HADL operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Kasamatsu. Now I'll turn over to Karl Rohr.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here today. It's great to reconnect with some old friends and to make some new friends. And really that summarizes this entire event for me. Out of a tragedy, you get some new experience, some new friendships that can come from a horrible event. And in this case, those of us that experienced it, those of us that lived in Japan at the time, my wife and children were in Okinawa. We had just spent that past November traveling for 3 weeks all over the mainland Japan. In fact, when Colonel Koch hijacked me from my day job and said, "You're now the 3MEB operations officer," pack your bags, we're leaving in 5 hours on the morning of Saturday. My oldest daughter said to me, can you make sure that Edo World still exists when you get up there? If you don't know Edo World, it's right outside of Tokyo. It's a former film studio, and it's kind of like Old Town Williamsburg for us here. She loved it very much. But when you're a good guest in your host home, and that home has been damaged, you go out of your way to help out. And that's what we in the U.S. military did on this occasion. And I wore my purple tie today to remind me not to focus solely on Marine Corps stuff. There are 3 Marines on this panel, so I had to do that. The bottom line is, while I did work for 3 MEF at the time and then became part of 3 Marine Expeditionary Brigade, when we checked in with General Fields, we became the Joint Support Force Japan Forward Command Element. And for General Fields, we became his eyes and ears forward at Sendai. And when we went forward to Sendai, we linked up with General Kimizuka's team. And as soon as we linked up with that team, we became partners with the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force. Yeah, when we first walked in the room, the entire room, about 4 times the size of this, every Japanese officer in that room turned and looked at us, and we're like, oh, really? The Americans are here? What did we do to deserve this? At that point, I looked at Colonel Koch and General Timberlake, and I was like, okay, we got our work cut out for us. We've got to do something, and General Timberlake looked at me and basically said, you need to do something to make my job easier. And Colonel Koch was just kind of like, yes, you do. Only the way he can say it. And in fact, he said, General Timberlake said to me, we need to get a win. And I said, I don't know what that means, but I got to go find something. So what we did as a team, working with James, and with very quickly meeting our Japanese counterparts in this Bilateral Crisis Action Team, or BCAT, as you heard about, we sat down at a table and we said, what can we do for you? Not what we're going to do for you, but what can we do for you? We looked them in the eyes and we said, you guys have been without sleep for the last 72 hours. You're wearing your men out. Your men and your women. You're putting 100,000 troops on the ground in search and recovery efforts. You're searching through damaged ground. You're putting your people at risk. And I know you're going to keep doing that. You're going to keep this search and rescue effort going nonstop, 24 hours, indefinitely. Where can we fit in to lighten your load? How can we make this easier on you? And that was a sentiment across the board for everyone in our forces as we were there. Our civilian staff, our military staff, that was what we were there to do. That's why we were there. That's the message we were getting across to the Japanese while we were there. And when they found that out, when we proved that to them, when we got that across, that's when we started getting things done. And one of the things we did to kind of prove that was before Sendai Airport was open, I met this tall Air Force Colonel, Colonel Bildt. He was a Special Forces Air Force Colonel. He's the guy that stood in front of General Fields and argued about getting this airport open. He also had some really cool assets and some crazy pilots. He said, you know what, I can help you out with getting something done. I can have one of my C-130s land at that Japanese Air Force base over there, and he can unload 50,000 water bottles for you. All right. And then I told the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, I said, hey, I can bring in 50,000 water bottles. and then we can put them on your trucks and we can deliver them to the local shelters. And they're like, great, we're short water, these shelters need the water, let's get it out there. And then this wicked cold snowstorm hit. I mean, it was snowing sideways. It was awful. And I looked at Colonel Tohoku, he said, "You still gonna do this?" And he's like, "Oh yeah. You know there's no power at this airfield. You know they have no running lights at the airfield." He said, "Oh no, the pilot's really excited to do this." I'm like, okay, I want to see it. So we went down to the airfield, and it's, you wouldn't believe it. I'm sure he never told his mom he did it, but he landed this plane in a blinding snowstorm, and all that to land, you know, water bottles, which we offloaded. It was a bunch of Marine sailors, soldiers, airmen, offloaded this pallet loads of water. We put it in the back of these Japanese trucks. They were unfortunately unheated. I think the temperature went to somewhere around like 8 degrees or something like that. And it's something we forget about, how miserable, on top of this tragedy, was it got downright nasty cold on top of everything else. So those people that no longer have their houses are also stuck in this terrible, terrible winter conditions. So we loaded in the back of these trucks, and we drove miles and miles for hours and hours in the back of these unheated trucks. Luckily, the Japanese Army provided us some wool blankets to wrap ourselves in. And we huddled in the back of those trucks. It was quite a bonding experience for a couple hours. And then when we got to these shelters, we delivered the water, and you know, the people were so receptive. It was amazing. And that little thing really showed that we were willing to take some of the pain to the ground self-defense force folks, or the entire self-defense force, and to the Tohoku team that was there. And when they saw that we were willing to suffer alongside with them, I think we really bonded at that moment in shared pain. And that was very useful at getting us in the door. And I think that helped Colonel Koch and General Timberlake make some headway in the planning. And from that point on, we were able to then go into executing what we normally do. 3MEF, Joint Forces in the Pacific, we do humanitarian assistance, disaster relief all the time. Now, the only thing we had to do was scale it back to providing it to a friend that's got everything already. They've got the means, they've got the ability to do this. We just had to, you know, control our own expectations. We wanted to help. We just had to control ourselves in how much we provided the help. We had to remind ourselves the things that we normally provide based off of our standard procedures with OFTA, with the Office of Foreign Disaster Relief or Assistance. We do airfield management, the Sendai piece. We do humanitarian aid and airlift delivery and reception, again, through once Sendai Airport was up and running. Communication support. We didn't really need to do communication support. Japanese infrastructure on communications wasn't that damaged, and what we could have provided wasn't enough really to assist there. Medical aid. Again, military medical aid wasn't necessary. They didn't need what we had. Their medical support and civilian medical support was enough. Search and rescue. Our search and rescue capability wasn't really that important. The U.S. Navy, Ronald Reagan, in the immediate aftermath, they turned around and, you know, in the immediate 24 hours to 48 hours, they provided immediate search and rescue off the coast. But after that, it wasn't necessary at that point. Critical infrastructure recovery. We did do that at Sendai, at some of the Shinkansen stations around the Sendai area. We made some things around some of the local schools. Government property. Why? Because unlike some of our other HADR opportunities in like the Philippines or in Indonesian areas like that, we had to deal with insurance. We never had to deal with insurance in humanitarian relief before, disaster relief. I mean, once we were clear around Sendai to remove, you know, once they said, hey, you can remove all the debris, You would never see a Lance Corporal in the Marines smile greater than when you told him he could run a forklift through a damaged Lexus. That is probably the happiest Marine ever. And then we also did. We brought our CBRN teams, our chemical, biological, and nuclear monitoring teams, and we were able to disperse them around the area, and they were able to add their capability for monitoring to the monitoring effort, which was useful. We can only monitor, we don't do anything but that. Of course, we did some decontamination of our own equipment, or attempted decontamination of our own equipment, some of our helicopters and things like that. And then lastly, outside of that, we did outreach. And outreach was one of our biggest hits of this whole thing. And kudos to the U.S. Army Japan Band for kicking in for this outreach program. We actually called it Operation Band Camp. It was, maybe that was unfortunate, but that was my call, and nobody said I couldn't. So we brought the USFJ band out, and they actually went to the shelters, and they played for the people in the shelters, and that was a huge hit with folks. And again, little things. Where there were gaps in coverage, those things that we could do to assist, those things mattered. Because, to be honest, as many people have said before, in this event, the Japanese people were very resilient. The Japanese government was very strong. The Japanese military was very professional. And they had 99% of things covered. All we needed to do was fill the gap, get them over the hump, and help where we could in those places where they just could use a little bit of help on the side. And it was perfect. It was a great team effort to get through that event. Just enough, a month, just over a month, just to help out where we could in that little bit. And the dividends from that assistance are paying off today and will continue to pay off. Because all we did was remind folks that a true friendship is something that you really can't replicate anywhere else or any other way than in an event like this. Not that you want to have this type of event, but these things do happen, and when they do, this is when you really see true colors come out.
Thanks, Karl. Appreciate that. I'd just like to throw out a couple of things for the record. It cropped up a couple of times earlier that different parts of the government, different parts of U.S. Forces Japan, even those just temporarily attached, we're all trying to do the right thing. Everybody's striving together. And quite often they didn't wait to be told. And I think certainly one of the things that the U.S. military prides itself on is initiative in its people. Kind of understanding the situation and everybody working together to do the right thing without necessarily being told to do it. And what I'd like to do is recognize Colonel Craig Kaczynski, who's not here today. But he was the commanding officer at a little-known base called Camp Fuji, which is a training base. And so between Task Force Fuji, which he formed up unilaterally, but between collecting up not just Marine FAOs, but Army FAOs and others, that the Go to Yokota message was done without anybody telling him to do that. He just did it. And he actually, I think, was halfway to Sendai with his task force of heavy equipment and things before anybody really knew where he was and what was going on. But at the same time, these were the people on the American side who were doing the work of clearing up places like Sendai Airport, and also forces, units come, logistics, combat service support units came from Camp Zama too. And it's important to understand that the people you see in the videos actually doing all the hard work on the American side, for the most part, came from those units. But Colonel Kasamatsu, I'd like to go back to you. Could you talk through a little bit more of the specifics of how you went through the operation to get Sendai Airport cleared up?
For this Q&A session, please allow me to speak in Japanese. Please say that.
Thank you very much for the question. The task force Fuji that was just mentioned, Colonel Kozinski led the task force, and that team came to Sendai Airport. And what they did was they didn't know what to do, but they really wanted to have a strong thought that they would like to help. And the very important thing they do is what they wanted to do could not be achieved by military alone, and therefore many broken cars, rubbles, and the remains, they actually cleaned up, but they themselves alone could not cover all the works. So what they did was the partnership with the civilians. I think they collaborated with the civilians in order to achieve their purposes. So their cooperation, for instance, the Maeda Road Construction, the company, which was the contractor for the maintenance of the airport. They actually cooperated with this company. And of course, there are the barriers in terms of culture and language. So how the military and the civilians could cooperate, I think you may wonder how and why. But they could do that. Why? Because I believe that leadership of the military or task force, what they always say is every day, the grandfather, grandmother, old people that they see around Camp Fuji, and also the affected people they encounter in Fukushima, they seem to overlap those people. And therefore, there is a very strong desire to help Japanese people. And by so doing, I think that also motivate local people who try to help together with this American team. So this collaboration took place, and that was a wonderful thing. We should take note of it. And the point was the special force. The special force rushed to the scene. And on the March 11th, of course, earthquake and disaster took place. But on the 13th of March already, the Operation Command of the Pacific came to the airport for reconnaissance work. And on the 16th of March, they landed on the airport. In other words, 3,000 meters runway, C-130, in order for landing, 3,000 meter runway must be used fully. And at that point, only 1,500 meter runway could be open unofficially. And so in that limited runway of 1,500 meters, they could successfully land it. So their landing then was the scary landing in their career. But the force actually landed there in order to undertake activities. And of course, control tower was broken. And so using all their equipment, the control activities were carried out. And therefore, I should say that various activities and there's bold actions took place there. And third point I would like to mention here is that the small space of the airport, which was finally opened, tried to be utilized fully. And from the airlift, the supply reliefs were accumulated there. And we have a colonel there. But using the Army's helicopter, try to carry this to the remote area, or using the SDF's trucks, try to transport the relief supplies. And this kind of coordinated action became possible thanks to the great cooperation.
Next one is for you, Colonel Koch. forward, USFJ forward, being located at Sendai was also located sort of as a joint task force on top of a joint task force in the Japanese joint task force. So it was a very complicated command and control situation. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of not just coordinating within U.S. Forces Japan, what was going on among ourselves, but also with our Japanese counterparts?
Sure. Probably the greatest challenge, and it's a matter of perspective, is when U.S. forces deploy, we deploy a capability. This is what we can do. And the Sendai team, the Japanese counterparts, wanted to know what we had so that they could almost look at a menu to pick out a particular asset to be able to employ. And so we worked through this, and this BCAT allowed us to work through those issues that when, you know, a requirement developed, we were able to leverage the right resource at the right time. Obviously, we ultimately, and it was Yokota that came up with sort of a tasking order, per se, that allowed us to sort of categorize efforts and to prioritize them. And then eventually there's a middle piece with the USAID and NGOs to be able to make sure that our response isn't always all military, because there's a lot more out there that can be leveraged to help. Military quite often is the wrong tool to use. So to be able to, so it's just not only being able to go through those sort of decision cycles, but to also educate and to work together. As I said earlier, this was the first joint task force. This was the first combined joint task force. This was a first of a lot of things over a very complex problem. So we just sort of worked through those issues, but everybody was there for the right reason. And that's what the friendships that were there really are what, carried the day. And the second thing is, and I made a little bit light of it, but for us up north, we only wanted 2 minutes with General Field. Just give us what you want us to do, and we're gone. And we wanted to be one less thing for him to have to worry about. And that's kind of the idea of things. And hopefully we achieved that. So, again.
I sometimes used to chair these BCAT meetings or used to help chair them and coordinate with others. And I think one of the things to remember about the shape of our presence, the American presence and the Japanese presence actually, in Sendai and Tohoku was that it was a rolling presence, and that we had a small group, like a wave, a small group initially, and then over time more and more people started showing up, and we got more and more capability as time went past. And then after a while, when it came to swap over responsibility from the Marine-led headquarters to the Army-led headquarters under U.S. Army Japan, you had people like Colonel Craig Agena, who I see in the audience, a skilled and accomplished FAO in his own right, show up, and that took over. And so you had keep adding capabilities as time went on, and it got better. One of the things we found as a challenge, both us on the American side and on the Japanese side, was identifying what needed to be done. And we'd initially do this by surveys of relief centers. And then in these meetings, we would determine, okay, we can provide bottled water, we can provide blankets, we can provide whatever we needed. And I went on one of the first convoys up to actually it was Ishinomaki, to a center up there, And we showed up, and we asked to see the manager, the leader of the center, a civilian, who showed up and looked at what we brought and said, we didn't ask for that, we didn't need it. Oh, really? This initially happened for several attempts, and we couldn't figure it out. And everybody, both my Japanese colleagues, and remember Colonel Hiroe was up there, and I, we couldn't figure out why we were getting it wrong. And then we went back on a next day, and we met same place, same camp, but the manager, who's a different person. I said, well, what happened to the manager? You're not the manager. Oh, yes, I'm the manager. I said, well, we rotate. And something as simple as, and the way I put it is, I used to be an assistant scout master. Any of you involved in a community or church organization can kind of picture this. Imagine if your Boy Scout troop or your PTA was running one of these centers, and you're doing it with good-hearted, well-meaning volunteers. And every day, they're not professional staffers. The coordination took a while to do, or didn't happen at all, and you'd be basing what you were doing on opinions. So fortunately, we're able to work through this and recognize it and get on. But it was not, communication was definitely working with the local population was as much of a challenge sometime for the Jiatai as it was for us. What I'd like to do now, looking at the clock, is open up the floor for question and answer, please. So, mic runners.
Thank you very much for very interesting remarks on your experience. I am very much interested in what you did for coordination between different organizations. Army, Marine, Japanese, and U.S. forces. And my question is about your coordination with naval forces, including U.S. and Japanese maritime forces. How Joint Task Force headquarters, that means General Kimizuka's headquarters, or your Joint Support Forces headquarters forward, how those headquarters were coordinating with Ronald Reagan and other naval assets. Thank you.
Well, the standard within, for us to talk to the Ronald Reagan, because we were directly lined up with the Joint Support Force Command, General Fields' office back at Yokota, we had basically had direct tasking authority because I could throw General Fields' name around, which was fun as a lieutenant colonel. If I wanted the Ronald Reagan to do something, because that was what the Japanese were asking for in the BCAT, if they wanted something done that required naval assets to do something, they said, this is what we would like to do. And talking with, in that coordination cell, talking with General Timberlake and General Kimizuka and in that level, they said this is what they would like to do, and it makes sense, and it meets all our requirements that we had set aside. We would then take that request for forces and that request for action, that mission, and we would send that mission to General Fields' office with a request. And then that would then get pushed to the naval component at General Fields' office for action. And 90% of the time, at that office, they would say, yes, we will do that, or we will attempt to do that. And it would get pushed out to the Ronald Reagan's office, staff, and they would then execute that mission. And that's how our staff work would operate. That same type of staff work was replicated in the Tohoku staff. If we wanted a Japanese naval force to do something, we would pass the same type of request for forces or request for an action through the Tohoku staff, who would then pass it down to the Japanese joint staff, Ishigaya, who would then do the same thing, same process. It's very standard staff work. That's the theory of how staff work works. there's personality always kicked in at that point, and you have to be very diplomatic in the way you do it. There's always the doctrine person that you have to talk to, the gatekeeper that you deal with, and sometimes those relationships go well, sometimes they don't. I'm always pleasant and nice to talk to in those situations, so but they usually worked out pretty well, and it was a relationship that people always wanted to help in this case. So if they could do it, they would do it. That was pretty much the relationship that we had going on.
Initially, because the staff was assembled very quickly on the American side, and the Japanese side was forming this new organization, communication sometimes was difficult from Sendai to the U.S. Navy. But we eventually within a few days, got a Navy liaison officer working alongside us, and that smoothed things out. But also a great advertisement for the 7th Fleet and the Maritime Self-Defense Force was, if I ever wanted to know exactly what the Ronald Reagan was doing, I would go and talk to the Maritime Self-Defense Force officers in the Joint Task Force Tohoku, and they could print me out the Ronald Reagan's their tasking order. They could tell me exactly what was going on. So the naval forces were very well coordinated bilaterally as well. And once we got our liaison from 7th Fleet, it really smoothed things up. So next question, please.
By doctrine, we set up something called a Civil Military Operations Center, a CMOC, which we developed over the years for the military-civil interface. You've referred a couple of times to cooperating with NGOs up in Sendai where it mattered. Could you talk a little bit about how that set of requests and fulfilling requirements worked, international NGOs, Japanese NGOs, and others?
In a way, we had a CMOC in action, vice in name. There were some, the NGOs worked through the Japanese task force. They were associated there. We didn't link directly with them in our task force, so we worked through the task force Tohoku for the link to the NGOs. But CMOC wasn't the term used, but it was there in that sense. So because we were embedded in the Japanese task force, we didn't need to have our own CMOC. There was no need to replicate it, what they were already doing. And there were quite a few civil operations going on all over the area at that point.
Kasamatsu on that amazing point.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well,
instead of having CMOC, we used to work upside down. Three prefectural government augmented by central government. So maybe 100% stronger prefectural government made a sort of headquarters, three headquarters, to which it's Northeastern Army headquarters or Joint Task Force headquarters sent very, very huge, strong liaison cell. So that instead of CMOC, those kinds of setup were what we try to do the business as CMOC does.
Maybe if I could just add, one of the pivotal differences is that, Japan, like the United States, has extraordinarily well functioning local, prefecture, and national governments that are able to well orchestrate all their instruments to be able to bring to bear, solutions. So our normal construct of CMOCs and civil-mil relationships are more orientated toward nations that don't have that capability. And we sort of have to assist USAID a lot with state and other organizations, NGOs, to bring to bear capabilities that just, existed there anyway.
I just wanted to, yeah.
Yes. 仙台空港においては
At Sendai Airport, there is no such official mechanism. However, through daily meetings, we included NGO representatives in daily meeting, and we prioritize the actions so that the objectives of NGO was reflected in that meeting. And also the coordination of the objectives of NGO and reopening of Sendai Airport. We only had limited resources, so through daily meetings, we prioritize the missions. At that time, what was important is this information sharing. So what we are going to do next, as far as government is concerned, did not necessarily get conveyed to NGO, and without the information sharing, NGO cannot develop long-term objectives. So at that time, I really felt how important it is to share information with all the parties concerned.
So we actually did have a CMOC up at Yokota. And so USA came in, and as most of the Americans in the room know, so the people in charge of this from the American side was the embassy. So the ambassador was responsible for this HADR effort. And so USAID came in with like what Suzanne talked about a little bit earlier, with the right people, the right skill sets. They had a group that came out and set up shop with us at Yokota Air Base. And then we set up an information sharing system, a knowledge management system, and I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's the standard thing that people do when they plop down somewhere and do this in different countries. And so people were able to plug into requests through that information system. We used the processes that Karl talked about staff-wise, and we were able to try to coordinate the efforts with the Japanese government and all the other countries that were sending both supplies and people to help. And so that's kind of how it worked. So a lot of it wasn't necessarily seen down at the level, at the pointy end of the people that were doing the real work out there, these guys and the Japanese Self-Defense Force under General Kimazuka. And so, but they would funnel what they needed, and we would, try to accommodate that through us at Yokota, through the embassy in Tokyo.
Okay, your question, please. Thank you very much for being patient.
No problem. My name is Samira Daniels, Ramsey Decisions. Former Hideki Matsunaga, a former panelist, mentioned something about the sort of vying that goes on among NGOs in operations, and I wondered to what extent that worked for you or against these operations, because this issue has been brought up in some other venues as well. As General Field just alluded to, we really had very little involvement. Most of the civ-mil coordination that was taking place at the local level was on the Japanese side. So, we can't, I can't recall any sort of, NGO disputes or issues like that. Perhaps at Yokota could speak to it, but, locally, we really didn't witness any of that. I don't know.
We didn't. From all our reports, everything that we had at the camps, everything for that matter, there were all of our humanitarian survey teams that we sent out. We would send out 4-man teams to go to the camps whenever we would send out supplies, just to go see what was necessary at the different places. James went with several of those. There was never anything that we saw, nothing that was ever reported back to us, that there were issues with those people providing assistance. Those were probably handled at the higher level, not at the, we worked at the operational and tactical level, if you understand what those are. And then the strategic level of who's bringing aid in, there were discussions about that type of stuff. I know Japan limited which countries could bring in things. You know, that's not what we dealt with. We were dealing with the immediate effect, trying to lighten the load for the self-defense force itself and for the folks immediately impacted on the ground. That was not for us. That was for that was General Fields to deal with and for the ambassador to handle. And they did a great job doing that. And I'm glad they did because I didn't have very tough to see it, so it was good.
I'm afraid time is against us, and I promised Colonel Kasamatsu to give him the last word. So please.
James, I really appreciate it. 先ほどフィールド
As the General Field mentioned about heroism, and I would like to share with you one story at the end. That kind of the self-defense forces man was there. He lost his house during operation, and he was given the house, another house by his boss, and then he was asked to continue working, sleeping in that house. However, he said, "Thank you. I lost 3 children, 1 wife, even though I was giving a new house. There is no family to take there. So my mission is to go back to the field and continue doing the relief work." Colonel Kozansky, he is the commander at Fuji. Colonel Toff, he is the commander of special forces. And then they are the ones who wanted to reopen Sendai Airport as soon as possible. They wanted to make this airport available for private, the commercial airlines. It was a very, very tough work, and they worked very hard under a very, very cold and tough environment. They, the commercial, the airline started operation in April. However, they didn't see that with their own eyes because they already left, because they said no one had to know we were here. However, we are very proud to be in this mission. That is the heroism. They just wanted to get credit, and that's not their mindset. They contributed and dedicated themselves to do something for the victims of the disaster. I would like you to convey this message to the mayor of Rikuzen Takata, the self-defense forces, and then the U.S. forces, everybody who participated in Tomodachi. That mission hasn't ended, and then it's still continuing in our heart.
Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.